And on our end, this is Books and Arts Daily with Michael Cathcart, where we turn now to bunyips, the terrifying creatures which, according to Aboriginal stories, live in rivers and waterholes around Australia. The earliest written account, as far as I can tell, is from the Geelong Advertiser of 1845, which reported that the bunyip had a head like an emu and a long serrated beak like a stingray's, its body covered in scales like an alligator's. And there's a link on our website to that newspaper story, so you can read it in the Geelong Advertiser online. Just click on the link there on the story here on Books and Arts Daily. Now, bunyips are back in the spotlight thanks to Stephen Wright from Nimbin, who last night collected a big prize. His essay, Bunyip, won the $5,000 Nature Conservancy Australia Nature Writing Prize. He received his award at a ceremony at the State Library of Victoria. Cameron Wilson talked about these awards yesterday on Bush Telly, and now we know who's won. The Nature Conservancy describes itself as, quote, working around the world in more than 30 countries to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends. And this prize is all about promoting and celebrating the literature of nature here in Australia. The judges were the Australian's Geordie Williamson, we were speaking to him just the other day, and a cultural historian, Janine Burke. And the winner, I'm pleased to say, is Stephen Wright. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
So this was a very strong list of finalists, so many congratulations.
Yeah, I'm very happy.
Yeah, no, you've come through a very strong pack. So let's find out about you. You live on a property in the Northern Rivers area of New South Wales.
That's
How did
right.
you come to write this piece?
How did I come to write it? I'm a writer of place and time. I always write from particular kind of circumstance, and the landscape I live in is really quite interesting. I live on the edge of temperate rainforest, and living on the edge of the forest is. It's a very dynamic sort of spot. If you go into the middle of a forest, it's really quite silent, and you wonder where the hell is everybody. But when you're living on the edge of the forest, that's where kind of all the action is. So that kind of speaks to me in the sense that you're always continually hearing kind of a lot of voices. At night, particularly, the landscape really becomes alive. My house also overlooks a major Aboriginal sacred site, Nimbin Rocks, which is about a 60 million year old volcanic formation that looks from a distance like a set of kind of huge menhirs, the size of office blocks. And it's a major site because the local Widjabul people used to bury their clever men there. So the kind of writing that I do is always kind of informed by that kind of dynamic, by the fact that we're living in a kind of highly politicised kind of landscape, but we're also living in a kind of extraordinary kind of landscape as well, and trying to describe how it looks from a very personal, particular, local kind of point of view.
So you tell the story of how you were walking one day and you discovered a waterhole under a lantana bush.
Yeah.
That's the kind of opening sequence of your essay.
Yeah. The waterhole's kind of located on my property, and the first time I saw it when I was looking at buying the property a few years ago was that it immediately reminded me of a story that my daughter was very fond of, a book by Jenny Wagner, The Bunyip of Berkeley's Creek, which is about a bunyip who's a creature kind of perpetually in kind of mourning. And I started to kind of chase up the kind of history of bunyips in Australia. As you say, there was kind of an early mention in the kind of 1840s. And in fact, right through the late sort of 19th century, there were kind of a series of bunyip sightings by the white settlers. And in the late 1840s, there was actually an exhibition at the Sydney Museum of a bunyip skull. It was only there for a week, but it drew kind of huge crowds. At the end of that week, it mysteriously disappeared. And I started to wonder why, of all the creatures in the Australian sort of Aboriginal stories, why it was the bunyip that people used to see.
Well, the last time I encountered a bunyip was in a television documentary that I presented about the runaway convict William Buckley,
right,
who lived with the Wathaurong people on the coast of Western Victoria for 30 years until he was reunited with English settlers in 1835. And the Aboriginal spokesman on that doco was David Tournier, who's the Cultural Heritage Education Language Officer at the Wathaurong Aboriginal Cooperative in Geelong and Victoria. He's a real expert on bunyips. And I spoke to him earlier and asked him what the bunyip meant to the Wathaurong people.
The bunyip was one hell of a scary animal. He was used to keep children in line, especially at night time, as was with me when I was a young boy with my grandparents. They used to frighten the living daylights out of it with stories about the bunyip.
What would they say, David? What were the sort of stories?
Oh, well, like things at night, you'd be sitting around the campfire and Nana start telling stories about all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and then she'd start talking about the bunyip. If you go anywhere near the water at night, this fella's going to eat you and chase you and rip you to pieces and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, no wonder we were scared at night.
So was that the main function as a sort of story for little kids? I mean, was the bunyip also a spiritual totem like the eagle is for the Wathaurong people, or is it a different kind of story?
I don't think he was more like the totem sort of thing, but he was definitely around. People, tend to think that he was just a myth or a legend, but, in '06 they found skeletal remains in Bannockburn, and the person, they had a sketch artist there, and they actually did a sketch in pencil of this thing, and we went through our archives, and there's a pencil drawing done in 18-something or other by one of the local mob here, and it's the exact same pencil drawing, something like 100 years later. So, sort of says to me that the bunyip was around, and according to history and story here, is that he was also used to keep the women in line, making sure that they didn't do the wrong thing, so to speak. Hence, we have a place called Buckley's Falls here in Geelong, and that was well known where the bunyip used to hang out. So, myth, legend, it's, yeah.
Well, William Buckley, who was the escaped convict who was cared for by the Wathaurong and really became a member of the community from 1803 right through to the 1830s.
Yeah.
He saw the bunyip. He described seeing the bunyip, didn't he?
Yeah. So, you can only go by people's, I suppose, visual sightings, I suppose, like William Buckley and of course our old people here. We tend to rely on oral history a fair bit. So, yeah, I mean, if the old people were talking about the bunyip, it's got to be true somewhere, somehow.
And are you aware of this being a more widely spread story? I mean, the Wathaurong people's territory is down beyond Geelong in Victoria, down along the coast there pretty much, and then up into the inland. But are you aware of other groups having bunyip stories?
Oh, yes. Yorta Yorta people, which is up on the Murray. Wamba Wamba, again, up on the Murray. Right through to South Australia along the Murray River systems. It's, that story about the bunyip is there. Even before I moved back to Geelong, the old people up that way were talking about the bunyip, and I'm talking about as far as Barranald as well, which is up towards Lake Mungo way. So, and they talked about the bunyip. So, if that many communities have stories and local gossip about the bunyip, to me, that's got to be saying something.
There must be something in it.
Yeah, for sure. But we just don't know what he looks like.
David, it's been great to catch up. Thanks for having a chat.
No worries, mate.
David Tournier there, the Cultural Officer with the Wathaurong Co-op in Geelong. Stephen Wright is with me because he's just won a big prize, the Nature Conservancy Australia Nature Writing Prize, because he's written an essay about the bunyip. So that's bunyips on the coast of Victoria, inland Victoria, well, right up through Victoria, actually. And you've told a bunyip story in Queensland, so they seem to be pretty widespread.
That's my understanding. As David was saying, it's not really, it doesn't seem to be really a totemic kind of story, but a really kind of widespread tale about a kind of malign creature that presages sort of doom and death, which is what kind of preoccupied me about it. Why did the white settlers, of all the Aboriginal spirits that they might have conjured up, why was it the bunyip, the really kind of malign sort of creature that just kept appearing to them over and over? I'm asking that question, I guess, it's the question I kind of raise in the essay and kind of leave at the end because basically Australia is founded on a kind of act of traumatic dispossession. And in my professional life, I work in the area of trauma. I work with people who've experienced trauma. And trauma always tries to make itself speak. And the thing about trauma is it becomes unspeakable. And when it can sort of speak and it can be kind of redescribed, then some kind of mourning can occur. And it just seemed to me that the appearance of the bunyip is the presence of something unspeakable trying to make itself sort of felt.
Tell me briefly about Thomas John Domville Taylor.
Thomas John Domville Taylor, yeah. We don't know much about him. He came to Australia in the late 1830s, a young wealthy Englishman. Under mysterious circumstances came here, left in the early 1840s. But in 2010, the National Library brought up a sort of box of scrapbooks and so forth at an auction, and inside there were some sketches by him. And one of them is really, really quite extraordinary. It's just describe it briefly. It's a pencil sketch, obviously done very, very quickly, possibly even by somebody who was at the scene himself, presumably Domville Taylor, and it represents about half a dozen identically attired squatters looking quite sort of robotic, who are shooting down 20 or so fleeing Aboriginal women and children, and it's about it concerns. He says on the title, a few notes these are written, it concerns the events that happened after the Battle of One Tree Hill, which happened outside Toowoomba in 1843. And afterwards we know that there was a skirmish on One Tree Hill between some Aboriginal warriors and the white settlers. The settlers came off quite badly. The Aboriginal warriors retreated out to Rosewood, and the squatters followed them, just exterminating any Aboriginal people they can find. The only sort of record that we now have of that is Domville Taylor's drawings.
Yeah. And listener, if you go to our website at Books and Arts Daily and look at this story, there's a link to the site of the National Library of Australia where that is reproduced. We can't reproduce it on our own website for copyright reasons. You write, we are inhabiting a sense of place where place has no longer any meaning.
Yeah, I think that's the real challenge for kind of non-Indigenous Australians. I mean, we've kind of arrived in this country, committed an act of traumatic dispossession, really, really devastated the country. So it's, in many areas on the verge of ecological collapse. It's very difficult to talk about a sense of place in the same way that Aboriginal people can talk about a sense of place. Even those of us who have, been camped here right since the very beginning, have only been here, a bit over a couple of centuries. That's not the same as being here for 40, 50, 60,000 years. And I think the sense of place that we're trying to establish here as non-Indigenous Australians is very, very precarious. And the only way that it's actually even possible is going to be engaged in some really kind of serious dialogue and an understanding of the Aboriginal people that would probably have to completely rework the way that we think about the country that we've occupied.
You say it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that there were once bunyips in the waters of Australia?
No. And as David said, he's not discounting the possibility as well. He's saying, look, people have seen these things. And in fact, the skull that was exhibited in Sydney in the 1840s was identified by Aboriginal people as a bunyip skull before it was actually exhibited.
Yes, that's the tantalising part of that story, isn't it? Yeah. I wonder where it is.
Well, it just, all I've been able to find out about it is that it kind of mysteriously disappeared. Yeah. Nobody really knows. It's just kind of part of the whole history of the kind of bunyip made this kind of strange appearance and disappearance. Nobody really quite able to grasp it, but it leaving this kind of imprint of doom on our minds.
The enigma continues.
Indeed.
Stephen Wright, thank you for joining us.
No worries, Mike. Thanks, heaps.
And congratulations. Stephen Wright is the 2013 winner of the Nature Conservancy Australia Nature Writing Prize for his essay entitled Bunyip.